Hi, welcome to the construction of shades and shadows on the James Gibbs house elevation and plan view for EGT1720. This is kind of a little cheat sheet version of what we're going to be constructing. And if you just look at it and copy it, it might be impossible to actually do that. But I wanted to give you a vision and point out a couple things before we jump in, just to kind of prepare you a little bit mentally. The goal here is to construct in both elevation and plan accurate shades and shadows for the abutment that comes out from the house and projects this corner onto the stairs. You need this not only for both the elevation and plan drawing, but the extrapolation of the elevation in perspective, where you need to use these reference points to more or less freehand eyeball the drawing. Notice I've numbered the stairs out here. This is important as a labeling system just as we ping pong back and forth, and that will become more obvious. I put mine right in the center between the two columns because the shadow shape doesn't get very far, and we don't want to put it very far away, otherwise we have a hard time drawing references, especially on the elevation where those stairs are so thin. And just as a way of understanding these drawings, the elevation stairs are thinner than the plan elevation stairs because the rise is shorter than the run, meaning where you put your foot, the run is longer and stepping up is shorter. Notice there's kind of a pattern here. On the elevation on top, we have a smooth and then jagged on the bottom. And in the plan, it's reversed. Smooth on the bottom, stepped on the top. And we'll talk a little bit more as we get into that. I want to do a fresh construction with you. I'll have a separate video of how I set these pages up that you can watch beforehand if you need to. That corner is the goal of this whole thing. Projecting that onto the stairs. This first bit here, we can just go ahead and shade that in. We know that there's nothing on the elevation that's going to impact that. Now, remember that very essential principle of shades and shadows where what is a point in one view becomes a line in the other view. So this point, as the shadow hits the stairs, it goes up in elevation up here. Okay, this is a counterintuitive move, but if you just follow along, I promise good results. We're not shading in that bottom stair because it's coplanar with the front of the podium or the abutment. So we're going to go right up here to the next one. I just give it a little hatching just to kind of visually remember, okay, I've done that, and now I can move on to the next one. And whenever this diagonal line intersects with the line of the stair, that is the point when that shadow goes up in elevation, right here. Why are these shadows here so long? Because they are describing the run where we put our foot. And you'll see when we flip down here in a second, these will be much shorter because they're describing the rise. So each view is informing the other view. We see in plan view what the elevation is doing, we see an elevation view what the plan view is doing. Now this is a very essential moment because as we get to this point here, as we cast that up right there, it is out of bounds of this shadow shape. And remember that all shades and shadows are the moment of intersection between the plan and elevation. Where those shapes overlap, that's where our shadow goes. So the fact that this is out of bounds means that this point is too far out. This will not be a shadow. So this now becomes the bounding box for that shadow. You should see something where, in an enlarged way, this moment, it comes up from the previous shadow, jogs over slightly, and then comes back at a 45-degree. Right there. So this is an enlargement of what's happening in that moment. And we need to take that point, the outermost point of that, and bring it down here. And what you'll see here in that moment is something kind of like that, where on the rise of the stair, we see that moment where the rise of the abutment in elevation, which is this line here, that ends and it starts to go into the horizontal right there. That's what we're getting in this moment right there. So this is the pivot point. As you saw in that previous drawing, plan is smooth on the bottom and then jagged or stepped, to use a funny pun, on the top. And we've already reached that moment here in elevation. So we'll now see that pivot point from stepped on the bottom to smooth on the top. That means once we hit that, we can shade all the rest of this in. And down here, we could shade all of that up to that point. And now our work changes from stepping on the elevation to stepping on the plan. So now this same point becoming a line here reverses. We'll go up to that next step point. Maybe I shouldn't have shaded in that elevation. And that point becomes a line in plan view. Notice I'm kind of digging my pencil in a little bit just so I can have a visual mark, a breadcrumb trail. And I told you before that the steps on the plan view would be much shorter because that's the rise. What we're seeing, the difference between these is actually the rise in elevation. There we go. That takes us to the top of the porch. That's where the pier and the columns sit. So we are at the end